They told me I was too old for this kind of love, too settled, too wise. But when he slipped into my bed that morning, I didn't move away. I moved over. Some homes feel too quiet, but mine had grown used to the silence. 51 years of life had taught me how to fill space, with routines, with books, with deadlines. I had my work, my coffee rituals, my quiet porch where the wind spoke more than people did. And I convinced myself that was enough. But if I'm honest, there were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when I stopped being touched. Not physically necessarily, though that too, but emotionally, spiritually. Like no one had truly seen me in a long, long time. So when I posted the ad for a tenant, I told myself it was just practical. The spare room wasn't being used. And a little extra rent money never hurt. I wasn't looking for company. I wasn't looking for anything at all. And then one Saturday morning, he arrived. His name was Liam, 24, photography grad student. He had these calm, observant eyes that made you feel like he was already framing the moment in his mind. Polite, soft-spoken, and disarmingly gentle in the way he carried himself. When I first opened the door and saw him standing there with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, I felt a flutter I didn't recognize. Maybe it was nerves. Maybe it was the sudden reality of someone stepping into my quiet world. I showed him around the house, the kitchen, the living room, the guest bathroom. He didn't say much, just nodded, smiled, asked if he could help carry anything. He declined. He moved in that day, and just like that. My house felt different, not louder, not chaotic, just warmer. Like someone had opened a window I didn't know was sealed shut. It was little things at first. He always made tea at night, jasmine or mint. And somehow I found myself doing the same, our schedules silently aligning like we'd choreographed it. We'd bump into each other in the kitchen, sometimes laugh at nothing, and then return to our corners like polite strangers. But I noticed how he looked at me, not in that wide-eyed, youthful way, but in a quiet, deliberate way, like he was curious about the life behind my eyes. And I started to wonder, had anyone looked at me like that in years? One evening I came downstairs after a long bath, hair still wet, robe tied casually. He was at the kitchen counter, editing photos on his laptop. I apologized for the way I looked, half joking, half embarrassed. He glanced up and didn't say a word. He just looked at me. Really looked. His eyes held mine for a second longer than they should have. Not lustful, not bold, just aware, present. And I felt it, that unfamiliar thrum under my skin. I told myself it was nothing, just a young man being polite. I went to bed early that night, but I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the sound of the kettle, the way his fingers moved on the keys, the way his eyes lingered on mine. I closed my eyes, heart quietly racing, and whispered into the dark, "What are you doing, Samantha?" The days blurred, but our rhythm settled. He was respectful, quiet, always offering to help. One afternoon, while I was assembling a bookshelf I'd ordered online, he walked in and offered to help. I said I was fine, but he stayed. He knelt beside me, our shoulders brushing. His hand guided mine to the screws, warm and steady. We laughed when we fumbled. His breath was close, so close I could feel it on my neck when he leaned in. I don't remember what we talked about. I just remember the air between us. It was thick with something I couldn't name, or maybe didn't want to. I started noticing the way his presence changed the way I moved around my own home. I'd linger a little longer in the kitchen. I'd spend more time brushing my hair. I'd double-check how my robe sat on my shoulder. I told myself it was silly. He was just a tenant. Boy, really. But one rainy afternoon, he knocked on my door. "Can I ask you something?" he said. He nodded. He asked if he could take a few photos of me for a lighting project. I hesitated, but then I looked at him. His eyes weren't demanding. They were hopeful, curious. Said yes. I wore a simple tank top. No makeup. My hair tied loosely. I sat by the window, the soft gray light spilling across my face. He didn't say much. Just click, buzz, adjusted, clicked again. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a woman past her prime. I felt like a story worth telling. I looked up at him between shots, and something shifted. His lens lowered, and for a moment he didn't look like my tenant. He looked like someone who saw something in me I'd forgotten was there. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew that something inside me had been touched. Gently, sweetly. And now I couldn't unfeel it. This wasn't supposed to be a story. It was just a rental agreement. But I was starting to wonder, was I the one being slowly invited in? Have you ever felt something shift in a moment that seemed so ordinary? If this story is touching your heart, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and tap the bell icon. You won't want to miss what comes next. There's a strange kind of silence that grows between two people who are trying not to acknowledge the truth. It's not empty. It's full of glances not taken, words not said, touches that never quite happen, but almost do. That's what it became with Liam. A long, lingering almost. We lived under the same roof, shared the same air, and yet, every moment between us felt like something waiting to happen. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was romanticizing a boy's politeness, that it was loneliness playing dress-up as desire. But then the small things started to feel like signs. One morning, I passed by the bathroom just as he opened the door. He was shirtless, a towel slung around his waist, droplets still glistening on his collarbone. He paused, looked at me, and then he smiled. A slow, quiet smile that lingered in the air long after he closed his door. I walked to the kitchen with trembling fingers, and when I touched my teacup, it was like my skin had become aware of itself again. It happened again on a Sunday afternoon. I was curled up on the couch with a book, and he walked in with his camera. He said the light in the room was beautiful. I nodded, expecting him to start photographing the window or the shelves. Instead, he raised the lens to me. Froze. "I can stop if you're uncomfortable," he said softly. I shook my head. "No, it's okay." I don't know what possessed me to say yes. Maybe it was the way he asked. Not with entitlement, but reverence. As if he thought I was something beautiful. As if he was afraid to break the moment by being too eager. Narration, breathy, slow-paced. He took pictures of me reading, of my fingers holding the page, of the line of my neck, the way my hair fell over one shoulder. I'd never felt so visible, to seem. When he lowered the camera, our eyes locked. Neither of us moved. The air between us turned electric. It was quiet, but the kind of quiet that makes your heart throb. Then he said, almost a whisper, You have the kind of beauty that sneaks up on you. I didn't know how to respond, so I smiled and looked away. But something in me shifted. Later that night, I found his photographs on the shared desktop folder. He hadn't hidden them. They were labeled. Light Studies, Samantha. Opened one, then another, and another. Each image felt like a love letter I hadn't been brave enough to read. Not seductive, not dramatic, just real. The curve of my cheek, the softness in my eyes, the stillness of me. I sat there staring at them, feeling my breath catch in my throat. Because for the first time in years, I didn't look lonely. I looked loved. Even if I wasn't. Even if I was only being captured. And then came that Tuesday morning. I was in the kitchen in my robe again. Barefoot, hair in a bun, the scent of coffee still lingering in the air. He walked in. Buzz. I didn't turn around. But I felt him behind me. Close. So close I could hear the soft inhale of his breath. "Can I help with that?" he asked, his voice low. He wasn't talking about the mug I was holding. I turned to face him slowly. We were inches apart. There was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Something almost scared, something vulnerable. And then his hand brushed mine. It was the lightest touch, but it burned through me. We didn't speak. We just stood there. Two people teetering on the edge of a choice. He didn't push. He didn't pull. He just waited. And I did what I've done so many times in my life. I retreated. I pulled my hand back, mumbled something about laundry, and walked away. But as I folded sheets in the other room, I couldn't stop shaking. Because I knew in my heart. That was the first time someone had asked to touch me. Not with hands, but with presence. From that moment on, the house became something else. Not home, not shelter, but liminal, a space between before and after. We still shared tea, still bumped into each other, still pretended nothing had changed. But we both knew it had, and all that remained between us now was waiting. When the silence between two people begins to speak louder than words. What do you do? If this story is drawing you in, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and turn on notifications. The moment you're waiting for is still to come. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, counting the spaces between the rain tapping on the windows, every time the old pipes creaked or a floorboard shifted. I imagined it was him, that his feet were crossing the hallway, that he was standing outside my door again, but he didn't come, and I hated how much that disappointed me. In the days that followed, we danced around each other like shadows. Our words were brief, our glances longer. I started noticing his absences more than his presence. I missed the way he lingered in the kitchen, the low hum of his music from the guest room, even the trail of his cologne after he passed by. It was like he had drawn back, afraid of crossing a line I hadn't drawn, but hadn't erased either. I told myself this was good, that the space was necessary. But I lied to myself. Because every time I heard the faint click of his bedroom door at night, my own fingers curled tighter in my sheets. Then came the morning that rewrote everything. I'd fallen asleep in one of his t-shirts. It had ended up in my laundry, and I'd kept it. Told myself it was just soft and familiar. I woke to the sound of the hallway floor creaking. Half asleep, I rolled over. And there he was, standing in my doorway, wearing nothing but drawstring pants, hair tousled, sleep still in his eyes. We stared at each other for a long time. He didn't speak, didn't move, and neither did I. Because something about the morning light made the moment feel weightless, like time had loosened its grip. Then he stepped forward, one slow, careful foot at a time, like he was approaching something sacred. He sat on the edge of my bed, didn't touch me, didn't ask. He just looked at me. "Are you afraid?" he asked. I could have said yes. I could have asked him to leave. But instead I whispered, "No." And then I moved over. It was the smallest shift, just enough for him to lie beside me. Not over me. Not under. Just with me. We lay in silence, our breath sinking slowly, like a gentle tide. My back to his chest, his hand, eventually, resting lightly on my waist. He didn't try to take anything from me. He just held me, not like a man staking claim, but like someone who had waited a long time to be allowed this close. And in that quiet, I felt something inside me unravel. Years of silence, of being unseen, of folding myself into corners so I wouldn't feel too much. They all slipped away as he pulled me closer. No words, no explanations, just his breath against the back of my neck, his fingers curling into mine. I thought love had to be loud, that it had to break things, that it came dressed in drama and declarations. But this was soft and steady and true. He pressed a kiss behind my ear, barely there, like a secret. And for the first time in a very, very long while, I felt safe in someone's arms. Not because he promised anything, but because he hadn't promised at all. He just showed up, when I least expected him, when I most needed him. We stayed like that until the sun had fully risen. No alarms, no phones, just breath and warmth and a kind of quiet I never wanted to leave. And in that moment, I knew something had shifted forever. He was no longer just my tenant. He was the first man in years to see me, and the first I had let stay. Have you ever let someone in not with a kiss, but with silence? If this part of the story touched something in you, like share and subscribe. The next part is where everything beautiful begins to feel dangerous. When I woke again, he was gone. His side of the bed was still warm, the sheets dented where his body had been, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if I dreamed it. But then I saw it. A mug on my nightstand. Mine, but filled with tea. Just the way I like it. He had made it before slipping out, without a word, no note, no knock, just silence and memory. I sat, up, the air around me suddenly feeling heavier. What had I done? It wasn't regret, not really. But it was something close, something tighter in my chest, something that whispered, "This changes everything." Because it had. Because now every corner of this house felt different. The hallway, the kitchen, the way I pulled my robe tighter when I passed his door. Even the way I moved felt different. Like I was trying not to disturb something sacred. Or maybe trying to pretend it hadn't happened. Later that afternoon, I found him in the backyard, camera in hand, focused, calm, like it was just another day. He looked up when I stepped out, offered a smile, so gentle, I almost broke in half. "Hey," he said, like nothing had changed, like we hadn't just shared a bed, a breath, 1,000 unsaid things. I nodded. "Hey." And then we stood there, pretending the moment between us was just another moment, but it wasn't. We both knew that. That evening I tried to write. I sat at my desk, fingers hovering above the keyboard, but the words refused to come. How could I focus on fiction when the truth in my chest was so loud? I kept seeing his eyes in the dark. The way his fingers had fit between mine. The way he hadn't tried to possess me but simply asked if I was afraid. And I had said no. Why had I said no? Why hadn't I asked him to leave? I paced the hallway that night, stopping outside his door more than once. My hand lifted toward the knob, hovered, fell. I was terrified of what would happen if I knocked, but more terrified of what it meant that I wanted to. How had it come to this? He was just a tenant, a stranger. Once, 12 years younger, a boy with a backpack and a camera and a soft voice. And yet, he'd touched something in me no one else had. Not out of lust, but out of presence. And that was more dangerous than anything else. I didn't sleep that night either. Instead, I lay there thinking about how quickly a life can shift, how one moment, one choice, can make everything else feel like a lie. I thought about the world outside this house, the rules, the judgment, the weight of how things should look. I thought about my own reflection, about the soft lines around my mouth, about the gray at my temples, about the way he looked at me like none of that mattered. And I hated how much I needed that gaze, because it made me feel new, alive, wanted. And that made me feel guilty in ways I didn't know how to carry. The next morning, I avoided him. I left early, sat at a cafe for hours, pretending to edit articles. I couldn't even read. When I returned, he wasn't home. And when I passed his door, it was shut tight. We had broken something. And now, we were bleeding quietly behind walls, still living under the same roof, still hearing each other's footsteps, but no longer brave enough to meet each other's eyes. What we shared that morning had been soft, beautiful even. But now, in its silence, it echoed louder than any fight, more painful than any goodbye, because it wasn't over. It had just begun. And I was terrified of what might come next. Terrified that he might never come back to my bed. But even more terrified that he might. Have you ever shared something beautiful, only to be haunted by it after? If this story is touching your heart, gently press that like button, subscribe to this channel, share it with someone who understands, and stay tuned. The final act is where healing begins, or hearts break. 3 days passed. 3 long, echoing days. He stayed out more, came home late, didn't linger in the kitchen, didn't ask about my day, didn't knock on my door, and I didn't knock on his. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know what I'd say. I didn't have the words for what we were now, for what that morning meant, or what it broke, or what it opened. Narration, emotional unraveling, poetic tone. The house was colder again. Not in temperature, but in spirit. The quiet wasn't gentle anymore. It was sharp, like walking barefoot across splinters. I missed his voice in the hallway. I missed hearing him laugh at something on his phone. I missed that tiny mug he always left on the edge of the sink, always just barely rinsed. I missed his presence, his energy, his nearness. And I hated myself for needing it. Because I had promised myself, after my last heartbreak, that I would never let anyone change the rhythm of my life again. But Liam had. Without trying. without asking. And now I was standing in the middle of my kitchen, pouring tea for one, and realizing how empty independence could feel. That night it rained. Not the soft kind. The kind that sounds like 1,000 tiny hands tapping the windows, reminding you that the world outside is still alive, even if you've gone quiet inside. I sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket, staring out at the blurred world. Then I heard latch and the front door creaked, keys drop, and footsteps. His footsteps, slowed just outside the living room. I didn't turn. I just whispered, "Liam." He stood behind me for a moment before I felt him move closer. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said, and it cracked something wide open in my chest. Turned then, met his eyes. "I don't know what to do with this," I whispered, and he nodded, stepping closer. "You don't have to know. You just have to want it." I looked at him. This young man with eyes too knowing for his age. This boy who had slipped into my life. And somehow found a room inside my heart I didn't know existed. "I'm afraid," I said, my voice trembling, "of what people will think. Of losing what we had, of wanting something I shouldn't." He knelt in front of me, gently, deliberately. "Then let me carry the fear with you," he said. "Not for you. With you." I didn't kiss him that night. Instead, I held his hand, pressed it to my chest, let him feel how fast my heart was racing. Not from lust, not from shame, but from relief. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't carrying my loneliness alone. And he, this quiet, soulful tenant, wasn't a mistake. He was a mirror, one that didn't judge the lines on my face, or the years I'd survived, or the cracks I still hadn't filled. He just saw me, as I was, and stayed. Weeks passed, and slowly we began again. Soft mornings where we sat on the porch drinking tea. Quiet nights where our bodies found each other. Not in desperation, but in peace. We didn't define it, we didn't name it, we just lived it. And every time I looked at him, I whispered thank you in my heart. Not for saving me, but for reminding me that it's okay to want love again. Choose it, even when it comes wrapped in questions, even when it looks nothing like the stories you were told. So I ask you, if your heart whispered what it needed, not loudly, not with fireworks, but in a quiet, trembling voice, would you have the courage to listen? Because sometimes, the love that finds you late in life is the one that finally feels like home. If this story left a mark on your heart, let it live on. Tap the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that speak to the soul. Love has no age, no rules, only timing.